Today we have with us an environmentally interested young Indian as part of the Voice of the Young series. Hello everyone, good to be with you again. We have Deepjeet Datta with us, went to IIT, went on to do work in very different environmental fields. Let's hear from Deepjeet. Over to you.
Thanks, Professor Mathur, for introducing me. Currently, I am working in carbon fields, about which I had asked you long time back. In my opinion, long time back, because your time scale and my time scale is a little bit different. For me, 3 years seems a long time, but you once corrected me saying, no, that's not long enough.
Oh, that's
So,
yesterday.
yeah. But yeah, I'll just give probably a short introduction of myself. As Professor Mathur mentioned, I'm Deep. I have 3 masters, 2 of them in earth sciences, where I sort of learned climate change modeling of sort, and then I sort of ventured into forestry management, something that's completely different from studying earth sciences or geology sciences, and that was academic wise. Then I sort of got into mainstream conservation activities. I joined WWF India. It's one of the premier, I would say, environmental NGOs in India. And I worked in some very interesting projects there and in very interesting places. Kanha Tiger Reserve for me was actually my job location. And I had a very good opportunity of doing tiger surveys. I do not know how many people get that chances
No,
to
we don't.
to do camera traps and everything. And also I realized that working in environment sector can be all at times, it can be very physically draining as well, because you do this transits, which are basically you take, it's nothing but you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sort of walk 20 kilometers for trekking tigers. And I kind of did that for 3 to 4 months, and it was less as strength of intellect and more a strength of stamina, but it was very enjoyable. And yeah, that's, but then and that's when I sort of reached out to you once, if you remember. I actually about randomized control trials, and if something of that sort could be designed, to prevent human wildlife conflict. But yeah, I'll continue, and then maybe we'll jump back to this. Then I sort of got this unique opportunity, to work in a large corporate where a startup was being formed, and I was asked, to sort of work in carbon credits mechanism. So this conglomerate was sort of corporate conglomerate was trying to, inoculate some sustainability practices in agriculture. And they wanted to make sure, they wanted to see if, those practices could translate into some kind of carbon emission reductions. And then consequently, they change into credits. And if it happens, then probably if there's a scope to sort of monetize them. So it started off as a kind of a research project, because I had the academic background, so I was running the models there. But pretty soon, what it became is, in a startup, you often have opportunities to wear multiple hats. So I started off as a modeler, but then sort of I gravitated, towards the parts where I had to pitch my projects to different carbon fund investors, which was also quite an interesting journey, I would say, because all of these investors were based out either in Singapore or in London. So
hang on for a second. Was it harder to work in Canva or here? Because both are very long hours, I'm sure. So which is preferable?
So one thing I would probably say is that the WWF one is something that a young person would be able to do. Because the terrain is very difficult. So, I do not know if you have been to MP. So the whole
I've been to MP, yes. I've been to Gwalior and the nearby ravines.
Okay. So my base location was Jabalpur, but I was more into the interior districts, like the regions that were like Mandla, Kanha, and all those places. So the terrain there is rugged, and I believe, at that time I was probably much more physically fit than now I am. So I could probably walk, 20 kilometers at a stretch. That wouldn't have been problem. But if I'm asked to do it now, I do not think I have the physical stamina. And the WWF's work is physically draining. It's hugely draining. But the work here was, again, it was different. It was mentally draining, I would say, because
Okay.
now I had to convince people and speak to them. And a lot of times, like before then, my habit was, to come prepared and speak. But I'm not someone who can speak on spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a thing I had to sort of acquire, to make the conversations happening. So those challenges were different, but I guess they happened to me at the right time, is what I would say,
Mm-hmm.
probably. And the complexities in the carbon space were actually much more.
Mm.
The
Mm.
WWF had the physical part, right? But
Right.
and the occasional scary part of, maybe I'll just see a tiger just some meters away.
Mm.
Or I actually have seen, bears just like 5 feet away from me, and bears are
Oh,
more scary and more aggressive than a tiger. A tiger will
right.
usually not attack you. A bear
Right.
will.
Yeah.
So, apart from that, most of it was fun, and for me, it was enjoyable. I grew up in an urban environment, so I've never seen forests like that. And whatever forest you
Mm.
see in a jeep,
Yes.
right, in the confined areas. I was actually walking through the interiors, so
Okay.
and I was tying up camera traps, and I was making sure that. So I was in a place I had just reached. 15 minutes back, a tiger cub had walked away, and I could
Yeah.
hear it roaring. So I
Wow.
had those type of
Mm.
experiences,
Mm.
and it was quite fun for me. So I felt like a Mowgli at times, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Carbon sort of, what happened in carbon spaces, it became, I would say, much more diplomatic, because there were different. So when you're selling credits to someone, a lot of transnational things sort of come into picture, right? So the complexities start to arrive. Whether, if an investor is buying, most of the time he has to make sure, that the credits that are originating from the country are allowed for sale.
Right.
And when I was working, there was a lot of controversy regarding whether, Indian credits would be allowed in the voluntary market or not.
Yeah.
So a lot of legal things were happening.
Mm.
And so I had multifaceted learnings, I would say, but the complexities were like an order higher than what I was doing in WWF.
Right. I
So it
understand.
was fun that way,
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, having said that, I sort of hung there for 2.5 years. I saw Murphy's Law at its finest. Everything that can go wrong would go wrong, and that happened. And a lot of, I believe, I've been a closet introvert of sorts. I've always been, left to my devices. But here, since I had to speak to people, I had to like come out of my shell. So I learned, how to switch on and off, and how to speak, probably, if time is required, which I guess is also a useful skill of sorts. So it was fun that way. And again, I remembered you, that you were the only person whom I knew, who had actually had told me that he worked in carbon markets.
Right. Right. Right.
So I had reached out to you again, saying, if you are still connected in the space that way. Yeah, and but it was fun that doing that. And now again, I have moved on to. So I was working in agriculture space there,
Right.
which wasn't my core strength, I would say.
Yeah.
I then sort of now jumped into forestry space, because I have actually done a master's, and now I'm working towards, creating large scale afforestation projects in India and originating carbon credits out of it. So again, the challenges are slightly different, but I feel well equipped this time. But let's
Mm.
see how it
So
happens.
how do you do this? I am intrigued. How do you create such a project, for example? What is in it?
Oh, so first of all, any carbon credit project is sort of, in a way, very similar to how you'll probably approach a real estate project, right? You need land.
Yes.
First things first, you need to identify land, and then you need to sort of identify degraded land, I would say, where there is an element of distortion that can happen. This is specifically for afforestation projects.
Right.
Right. So we do that. So since we sort of look at maps, we look at these different khaswas, we look at the soil maps that are present of Indian online databases, and then we sort of try to lock into areas, where we see there is, say, a high element of degradation of soil that is happening, or say a high element of deforestation that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Once we sort of lock into those areas, what we do is we try to then sort of find out, how certain variables, in terms of land, what's the land ownership record in those regions, because that's one of the key factors that
Mhm.
need to be addressed, right? Second, we see how messy the whole tenant system is. For example, if there's a lot of tenant farming happening, are there some kind of records that are there that can be substantiated? So our initial scoping activities all boil around land ownership, and we try to clear that up. And say once we sort of get a sort of hands-on idea of what's happening, next what we try to do is we reach out to NGOs that are working in that region, right? And the NGOs that have a good sort of, I would say, approach and a sort of good base in that region, because uh, for a carbon project, it minimum it requires a 30-year time frame, to sort of get your project completed, and that can only happen when the people who are involved are into your project, and those involvement only come when they see a known face.
Right.
And that's why we sort of reach out to NGOs and proper NGOs that have worked for 25 years, 30 years in those regions. We reach out to them and we sort of partner with them.
Yeah.
Now we come with our skill set, of developing these carbon credits and
Right.
monetizing them and then originating them. The
Right.
NGOs have the implementation strength,
Right.
so we sort of complement each other that way. And once sort of that happens, then we sort of start the entire process of onboarding the farmers, the landowners. We sort of educate them, sensitize them about what we are going to do and how they can benefit from it.
Right.
And when this entire thing happens two ways, so say if it's a community land in a village, then we straightway approach the gram panchayat and we make sure to
Mm.
sort of onboard them, as how things are done. If it's individual landowner, then we sort of go to the landowner themselves and we sort of our NGO partners sort of go there, and then we sort of make sure that we tick the right boxes, we identify the land record, and we sort of create a database of such. So
Okay.
once this happens, since now I'm working in afforestation, what we do is we make sure that we give them, we sort of identify first the native species. We make sure
Right.
that we are not giving them any kind of exotics or something that will, probably be an invasive species, right?
Mm.
So we sort of figure out the native species there, and then we sort of get the seeds. We have our own seed banks. We sort of make sure that the seeds are sort of given to the farmers. And once it is done, we sort of also train them into how the planting should be done. And we actually go to the field and we make sure that the planting activities also happen. So we are there through and throughout during the entire planting season. And once this is done, we periodically now here an element of unit economics comes, right? So a farmer, if he is just planting trees with no benefits,
Yeah.
say before fifth or sixth year, because the credit is directly proportional to the biomass, the
Correct.
girth of the tree,
Correct.
and it will not be thick till it reaches the fifth or sixth year,
Right.
right? So that's where we are trying to do a lot of innovations. Maybe we throw in an element of biochar so that we can hit credits
Yeah.
at a like say we can hit credits quicker, or we try to see what we can do. We try to make sure that maybe we are doing an agroforestry of sorts, so that you can have fruits, and we can sort of connect. We can do a backward linkage of those fruits to the market, and then we get an element of revenue out of it.
Okay.
So this is where we sort of figure out the pieces in puzzle. And once the planting starts, we are there for the entire planting thing. And then what happens is we make sure periodically we check the health of the plants, and
Mm.
we keep constant communication out there, so that our trees survive the duration of the entire program. I'll probably take a pause here, and maybe Professor, if you want to ask some more things.
Yeah. Okay. So, uh, unrelated question.
Yeah.
How do you handle the language issue as you go around India?
Oh, yeah. No, that's actually a great question. I've had some like great, uh, some fun incidents, because I did not understand the language very well. So this issue has happened again in WWF. It was very simple and straightforward, since I would go out with people. The field staff were localites,
Yes.
So I would go and I would stay with them. So there the issues were handled that way. But in MP, in the certain regions, there's this very strong Bundelkhandi accent,
Yes.
which for me is very difficult to understand.
Yeah, that's
So
what I'm asking.
I speak Hindi in a very Bengalish tone. So my Hindi is not that good. So I have had to depend very much on my field staff, on the people who drive my car. So in field, I would absolutely have at least one person who understood the native language, and
Yeah.
that is an instruction that was given to us beforehand,
Yeah.
that do not venture alone. I mean, the problem you would have in a jungle is with human beings, not with animals.
Yeah.
So I would always be with someone who understood the native dialect very well. That was how I sort of have handled this problem, and eventually I started picking out also the language. It took some time, but I started to understand it, not well speak it. And but yeah, there are always some goof ups that happen. I mean, the person there sort of is saying me something, and I wouldn't understand. And often in those regions, the tones are also very different. So
Yeah.
for sometimes I have found the Bundelkhandi tone to be at times a little bit aggressive, and so I thought maybe the person was angry at me, but that's how he actually speaks. But
Mm.
yeah, that's part of life, that goof up
It
sort
is,
of
but
happen.
it's the thing is
Yeah,
you are communicating a very complex idea. This is a
yeah,
very where is your money coming from? For example, that's a
yeah,
key question. They want to know the whole program, and you are explaining something that is completely unknown to them through
yeah.
a translator. Who the translator himself or herself is not very familiar with it. So it's very complex, I think, to be able to get it done.
Yeah, so no, for the carbon part, what has happened is, so the partners that we are working currently, they are actually very much aware now,
Okay,
and
they understand. Right.
yeah, they do understand very well, and you will probably not believe the amount of knowledge that sort of has disseminated now into the NGO. So now
Okay.
everyone has sort of jumped onto the bandwagon to get
Okay.
carbon
Everybody
credit.
knows what is a carbon credit now.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So things have changed. Okay. So
yeah,
everybody
things
knows.
have changed drastically. I mean,
Mm,
and I have seen this change happen, firsthand. So
mm,
when I started, it was in 2020, right?
mm.
So, and we started in Punjab and Haryana. And when
Yeah.
we were starting there were like people at that time were just understanding what the concepts are. By the time my project had sort of reached its end, farmers were calling me up and they were asking about carbon credit. So
Yeah.
that is the amount of knowledge dissemination that has happened.
Okay.
So
Good. And now,
and similarly, I'm seeing that same trend here in MP as well. So
okay.
people here quite are becoming quite aware of the carbon credit. So like if the complexities are there, but they're in terms of execution, not
Yeah,
in
but
terms
they
of
think that, look, you will handle most of it. They just
yeah,
want to know what is their role
yeah,
and their money, right? How will
yeah.
they
They
get
want to know about the money
right? They
basically.
want
When
to
are
know
they
about
going
the
to
money. Right.
when are they going to get the payment? So
Right.
at the end of the day, it boils down to that.
And do they trust you that you will pay?
So that's a great question. Mm, you are very much aware, right? The carbon credits, since they hit it late. So when I'm going right now, say in 2023, I do not have money of the credits. I
No,
will
you
only
don't
get it
have.
in 20,
Right.
26, 27, whenever that happens, right? So that's why we are sort of, trying to put out fruits and those type of projects so that there's a revenue stream there, and we sort of try to link it that way.
Yeah, it has to be because they
Yeah,
may not even believe that you will be around in 2026. Who will pay
yeah,
me? Will there you be around? And you say, no, I might go somewhere. And then say, who will pay me? How do I know what is
yeah.
going on? So obviously you have to give them some short-run revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's why we sort of feel that agroforest is like a less difficult path to sort of implement these projects. And second, that's why we sort of work with the NGOs as well, so
Okay.
that we make sure that since the NGO has been there for a longer period of time,
So
they sort of bring in the trust coefficient
they
into
bring
the
in the trust. Okay.
yeah.
Now, what is the role, if any, of the state government in this? or the panchayat or any of, these constitutional bodies like Gram Sabha, Zilla Parishad? Do
Yeah.
you deal with any government agency, and if for what?
No,
If you,
so we do. We
you
do.
do.
We deal with both Gram Sabhas, we deal with Gram Panchayats. So now what has happened is even the low carbon funds, they have sort of imbibed this language, in their like when you have to fill documents there, they are also asking for, whether we are interacting with Gram Sabhas or not, whether we are working with
Right,
panchayats or not.
right.
So they have sort of they are very much aware of the Indian administrative system down ground.
Okay,
So
okay.
there's no way you can sort of bypass these Gram Sabhas or panchayats, and you shouldn't do also, I believe, because it acts as a good safety buffer for
Hmm.
us to work.
Okay.
Now the programs are like two-fold, right? So if you are doing RAID, like REDD plus programs,
Yes,
those are programs that are directly to be handled by the state forest departments.
right,
So we are not doing that because because the path there is complicated, and we do not know whether they go towards NDCs of India or they go into the voluntary market. So
right.
since that's a little bit of a gray area, that's probably a little bit risky to work there.
Hmm.
But for other projects, where agroforestry is being done, where agricultural land is being done, there we do not get, in villages 100% of the land ownership, right? Part of it is community land, part of it is
Yeah,
pasture land, part of it is degraded land, and these lands are directly under Gram Sabhas.
right.
So we generally, we in every stage we involve Gram Sabhas, that because they also act as opinion makers that way,
Right.
because you cannot probably have like they sort of morph the opinion in your favor. So
Okay.
we engage heartily with the Gram Panchayats for sure.
Do they ask for
And
bribes?
not not yet. No, the bribes are, I mean, there's no bribes to give, there's no money in, like, if I'm planting trees, and this is a real problem in 2023, the finance will come in 28.
Yeah.
So, till then, I mean, even if they had asked for bribes, we don't have any to pay them. So, that hasn't happened yet.
Yes,
And
sir. So,
also, the revenue is so minuscule
yeah.
that,
Okay.
yeah,
So, all right.
yeah,
Okay. What
not
about
really.
but you don't have to deal with the state government.
At some levels, yes, we do have to, because since it's a land parcel, it is like it's always good to keep the state government in the loop, and for many of the state governments that I have spoken to, they are actually very much aware of carbon finance, and they want to have those finances like
Yeah.
sort of into
Yeah.
their revenue system. So
Yeah.
state governments, anyone who's developing carbon programs in India will have to work with governments. He cannot bypass that system at all.
Okay. All right. What about politicians? Any
Uh,
interactions with politics? I mean, these MPs and MLAs of the region that you are working in, do you meet
yeah.
them or do you just ignore them? How does it go? Or case by case?
So it depends on case by case. It depends on the state you are working in. It depends on where you are working in, and it depends on the type of projects also you are working in.
Hmm.
So it would be completely. I mean, I would say that it depends.
Hmm.
But politicians generally are also. What I have seen, in past 2 to 3 years is that when I started, I thought, nobody understood about carbon markets, and I would always crib about it in my friend circle, and I would say that I am going to leave the market, I'm going to leave the market. And now suddenly I see that it has picked up. The
Yes.
language it
Yes.
has aroused huge interest in everyone, and now I sort of feel lucky that I was probably at the right place at the right time,
Okay.
is what I believe.
Okay, good, wonderful. Maybe I should be more interested in it than I am, but right now I'm very, very tied up with so many things. But I'm
Mhm.
glad that you are doing this. What do you see as the future of for yourself or for India or for the carbon market? What do you see? Or what do you hope for?
Okay, so I'll start with for carbon markets. For carbon markets, the way I see it, probably carbon credits will become sort of like strategic minerals, like uranium and other become, and government will probably nationalize it, and that has started already. In Zimbabwe, government has declared that all credits that are originating from Zimbabwe has to be approved by Zimbabwean government, and they will keep 70% of the credits with themselves.
Okay.
So, and they will decide the price. So it is going to become, it's going to, this voluntary registries pretty soon will be out of the whole ecosystem.
Okay.
Every country is going to build its own ETS, its own carbon systems,
Yeah.
and through that they are going to trade, and that's going to happen.
Okay.
And in Southeast Asia, Indonesia has already started that process.
Okay.
So that's one trend I'm seeing, and I think that will happen into India as well. For me as a person, yeah, so till now I've had fun working here, and I did learn a lot, and I did not expect this line of work at all. I mean, when I was doing academics, I was not aware of carbon credits. When I was working in conservation, also I was not that much aware of this field. But now having done that for 3 to 4 years, yeah, it feels like a great place to work. But I do not know whether I'll work there for the next 15 to 20 years or not, or
Yeah.
whether the market will stay that ways or not.
Yeah.
But one trend I'm seeing probably is that it's a good time to be a sustainability professional now.
Yeah, that is for sure. It is a
It's
good time.
becoming mainstream.
Yeah, it is
And it's
mainstream. Yes, it's becoming
and
mainstream.
initially it was confined to CSR activities, and it was being done by NGOs, but now it's becoming very much compliance related, and for some it's also becoming source of revenues. So I see a lot of tech startups happening around the concept of sustainability. So probably the next big market boom that will happen in sustainability domain in India, is what I believe. And now a lot of tech interventions and innovations will sort of come into it, and it's a good place there. And probably, as just as IT had brought in a lot of revenue for India, I guess, this, if the government takes proactive steps and makes the markets a little bit more conducive for innovations to happen, this can become as big a market as IT was for India in the 90s. This is what I believe should happen.
Okay, all right, fair enough. That's what I wanted to know from you as to what you think. So you look like, it looks like you're in a good place. You at the right place at the right time. There are many opportunities you think that will come. It's not a declining market. It's a rising market. It's a rising business, right?
Yeah,
And agro, and
it's
in general, forestry and agro, they are going to be around in India for years to come. Whether you do it
yeah.
for carbon credits or you do it without carbon credits, it's going to be there. I think you're absolutely, I agree with you. It's going to be there, very much so.
Yeah. And the trend is, I mean, in a way, you would not see, premier institute guys sort of getting into these markets, right? Like people from IITs and IIMs, they would usually get into the tech field because that's where the remuneration was. What I am seeing is a, reversal of trends, that now people from these institutes also are straightway jumping into agrotechs, are straightway jumping into carbon credits, are straightway getting into sustainability. So probably they are also seeing this trend, that this is a field where there is a lot of sort of rewards to be gained if one
Yeah.
works for a dedicated period of time. So
Okay.
that's
All
a trend I do see.
Okay. Any final words before we close?
No, what do you think about this market? As you have seen the entire cycle, right? You did it 25.
I think the market is certainly going to be there, but as you and I have discussed in the past,
Yeah.
the market is not very ethical. Okay, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's just not attractive at all. Too many people, as you said, know about it. They game the system. This is not. They are not going to do what is required. They're going to do what gets a pass mark. Okay, you can sell the credit. Okay, and the faster and quicker you sell it, you are done. Okay, and everybody's pretending that it's all okay, but actually the results are not there. You don't see the impact. But I can take a plane and I can buy a carbon credit and I can feel good. But I really don't know whether what's behind that, even if that actually there's something happening behind it. This is very, very difficult to police and monitor and ensure. So it is not, it has its dark side too. And ultimately, the fear is that people will say, look, this thing is just a fraud, or part of it is a fraud. I mean, there's just no question about it. Part of it is a fraud. That there's no way to check everything. This is not going to be the case. And but the agro and the forestry side of it, that's real. Okay. So there's a real side to it. But what you can sell it for, that is a different story, because you're selling it like 50, 60 years, this tree will be there, but it won't be there 50, 60 years. It'll perhaps die or whatever. Nobody really, I don't know. I'm not, all of these projects have the dark side, we can't really be sure. But that's just my interest, this is my concern. And I also think, by the way, that, these are all coming from mitigation, okay? From the mitigation side of climate change, that we do the carbon credits so that we release less CO2. And as we release less CO2, we hold off climate change. Okay. But what is happening is that climate change is already happening. Not a question of it's in the future. Climate change is already here. And to me, if I were to position, I mean, I'm thinking of writing a book, but that book will be on adaptation.
Okay.
Okay.
So you see, there will be no mitigation of sorts, and
mitigation is happening, but mitigation is not happening enough. I mean, every
not
day you
fast
read
enough.
India, NCL is building a 12,000 megawatt thermal plant, another person's building 10,000 megawatt, and rightly so, because we don't have the ability to put in the equivalent solar with the grid and storage. We don't have the storage, we don't have the grid. So what are we going to do? We are going to have to rely on coal, and we are going to have to fight it out in the international arena. And China is similar, though they have better infrastructure. And many of the African countries, though they're quite small in top population, they also have similar problems. And even the US grid, you read, is not ready for a huge number of electric vehicles. Charging systems are not. Now, of course, people will solve the problem, but by the time they solve the problem, your carbon ppm is rising every year. So it's a question of not, okay, I'll do it 10 years from now, but in the meantime, in the 10 years, your carbon levels are rising. And so climate change. So I think if it's also a good idea to think about adaptation.
You think we'll be able to contain the 1.5 degrees Celsius, or we'll cross it?
Well, I don't know, but 1.5 is not a joke.
Yeah.
1.5 itself, I mean, Pakistan, 1/3 was flooded last year, right?
Yeah.
That's perhaps it's climate change, perhaps it's not, but in any case, we have to think about adaptation. And so that's what I'm going to think about, even though, I'm no longer your age, but that's what I would say is critical to think about both. Carbon market and mitigation, and keep your 1 foot in that, and 1 foot you begin to think. We don't know the answers, we don't know how to do it, we don't know what to do, and you have to understand that, look, there's going to be mitigation projects, adaptation projects. There has to. So far it's not clear that we know the answers. I don't know the answers, what to do, how to do it. So we should think about it and be ready on that side also. If you're going to be in sustainability has two prongs: mitigation and adaptation. And actually, adaptation may turn out to be
the bigger,
not a bigger problem, but it's a more localized problem. And then when the problem is localized, then the people there feel it. Okay, our fields are flooded. Okay. And all of the people there are done for because their fields are silted or whatever it is, they cannot function anymore. So the problem becomes quite well known, whereas a problem spread over millions of people is not so well understood or known. So anyway, if you ask me, I think I'm not yet thinking, but I will think more about adaptation. I'm done with mitigation, what I'm saying. I'm done. But I want to know and learn about mitigation and think about it and what those projects mean and how you could actually implement those projects. Okay. That those are adaptation projects. And I am working with a firm, not working means I'm loosely affiliated. They're using sensor data from space data and all to observe agriculture. They're not quite adaptation as such, but they can think about moving into adaptation. That look, these crops are working better there, these crops are working better here. These changes will have to come, I think. Anyway, I'm no expert on it now, but I'm going to perhaps later on in 4 or 5 months begin to think about it. Till then, I'm still involved in many other things. So anyway, I'm glad that you are well compensated and in a good position. And let's end this here now and say bye to the viewers. Bye-bye, everybody. I'll be
Bye.
back next time with somebody else who's equally interested and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you.
Deep, see you sometime later. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye bye. Good night.